Have you ever stopped to realize how many decisions in your life were made based on what other people would think? The outfit you didn't wear, the business you didn't start, the dream you put in a drawer, the opinion you kept to yourself because you were afraid of being judged. Now answer me this: who actually made those decisions for you? Your ego. But not in the way we usually think. We tend to associate ego with arrogance, with that person who thinks they're the best in the room. But ego has a much quieter, much more dangerous face. It's the voice that makes you live for other people's approval, that paralyzes you with fear of judgment, that turns what others think into a constant courtroom inside your head. Hey, how's it going? My name is Adam, and this is Virtue Simulator. Today, we're going to talk about a concept that completely changed the way I see ego, one that sits at the very heart of the book Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Other people's opinions are external noise, and ego is the amplifier that makes that noise sound like the only truth there is. Big idea one: living for approval means running on ego's autopilot. There's a massive difference between doing something because you truly believe in it and doing something because you want others to admire you for it. The problem is that ego blurs that line so subtly that we barely notice when we've crossed it. Ryan Holiday tells us that passion, that fuel we so often romanticize, can be one of ego's biggest traps. Because when you're driven by the passion to be recognized, to be seen, to be validated, you're not building anything solid, you're building for an audience. And when the audience changes its mind, and it always does, you collapse right along with it. The alternative isn't coldness, it's purpose. Purpose is internal. Purpose doesn't need applause to keep standing. When you act from a clear sense of purpose, other people's opinions become exactly what they are: external noise. You listen, you filter what's useful, and you move forward. What you don't do is let that noise drive your life. Big idea two: when everyone applauds you, the noise starts to sound like music. And that's dangerous. Kodak is one of the most painful cases in corporate history. For decades, it was the most powerful company in the photography world. A dominated market, massive profits, global recognition, and it was exactly that recognition that killed it. In 1975, an engineer at Kodak itself invented the digital camera. The company had the future literally in its hands, but the internal opinion is there from executives, shareholders, an entire corporate culture drunk on its own success, said that it was a threat to the business model, and Kodak chose to listen to today's applause instead of seeing tomorrow's reality. In 2012, it filed for bankruptcy. The ego of success does exactly this. It turns today's approval into tomorrow's absolute truth. You stop learning because you think you've already arrived. You stop questioning because everyone is telling you you're right, and the external noise, which should be filtered, becomes the only voice you hear. Always be a learner, especially when everything seems to be going well. Big idea three: the most dangerous noise is the kind you produce yourself. It's very easy to spot ego in other people. We can clearly see when someone refuses to accept criticism, when someone acts to impress, when someone makes a decision that's obviously driven by vanity. The problem is the mirror, because ego has an extraordinary talent for hiding from the very person it lives inside. Steve Jobs is a fascinating example here. When he was fired from Apple in 1985, the company he himself founded, his ego was completely exposed. He was a leader with brilliant vision and catastrophic people skills. He dismissed feedback, he humiliated teams, he lived so convinced of his own genius that external noise, including the useful kind, was simply thrown away. Being fired was brutal, but it was the mirror he needed. In the years that followed, founding Next and transforming Pixar, Jobs learned to observe himself from a greater distance, to tell the difference between what was genuine intuition and what was ego disguised as intuition. When he returned to Apple in 1997, he was a different leader. Not perfect, but self-aware. And that self-awareness made all the difference. Fight to see your own ego. It's the most courageous thing you can do. Big idea four: the story you tell about yourself might be your biggest trap. Jeff Bezos has a quote that stuck with me. He says that Amazon's success wasn't a plan. It was an accumulation of experiments, most of them failures, and constant adjustments. But when we look from the outside, ego builds a different story. A brilliant visionary faces obstacles and reaches the top. Beautiful, cinematic, and completely false. When I started this channel, I had a narrative in my head. I thought that with consistency and dedication, results would come almost naturally. Reality was very different. There were months of videos with almost no reach, harsh comments, formats that simply didn't work. And the hardest part wasn't the failure itself. It was the gap between the story I had built about myself and what the numbers were actually telling me. It was only when I stopped clinging to the pretty narrative and started treating the data as information, not as judgment, that things began to shift. Other people's opinions became data. Data has utility. Judgment only has power if you give it power. Ryan Holiday warns us, be careful with the stories you tell about yourself. Ego loves a linear, heroic narrative. Real life is made of mistakes, detours, and fresh starts. And that's okay. That's how it works. So, let's recap what we covered today. First, living for approval means running on ego's autopilot. Replace the passion for validation with an internal purpose that doesn't need applause to survive. Second, the ego of success is the most treacherous. When everyone is cheering for you, that's exactly when you need to keep learning the most. Third, seeing your own ego is the most courageous act. Self-awareness isn't weakness. It's the greatest competitive advantage you can build. And fourth, be careful with the stories you tell about yourself. The real journey is full of mistakes and adjustments, and that's not defeat, that's the process. Other people's opinions will always exist. You have no control over that. What you do have control over is the volume you give them. When ego is in charge, that volume goes all the way up, and external noise becomes a soundtrack of your entire life. When you learn to filter, to tell the difference between useful feedback and plain noise, you reclaim something precious, the authorship of your own decisions. If this resonated with you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one. Be a better person.